Hello and welcome back. I'm Steve Murphy, a trust and estates attorney with McGuire Woods LLP, and this is Legacy Planning Once Removed, my podcast on trusts, estate planning, taxes, property, legacy, family, and everything in between. When I'm talking with clients about their estate planning, they often ask about the rich and famous. They ask about those high net worth individuals. What are they doing? What are the strategies they're using? Well, the strategies they're using might not be what you think. So this is an episode of perhaps an unexpected subject, Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis. You may recognize those names. They were teenage stars of the sitcom That 70s Show, and then they went on to various movies and other projects. They've both been involved in charities, and Ashton Kutcher has a venture capital firm. They got married in 2015, and they have two young children, ages 8 and 6 as of this episode. And now they have a reported net worth of about $250 million total between them. But they've made the news over the past several years with their comments on parenting and how they're trying to raise well-adjusted kids despite their considerable fame and resources. You can look it up online. They've gotten attention with their comments on giving presents to their kids, for example. But they once again made the news with comments they made about their estate planning. Ashton Kutcher first made that comment several years ago, but it recently resurfaced on social media. Let me pause for a moment and say how much I've enjoyed working on this episode. When I was at a wedding recently, we got talking about Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis and their perspective on wealth. It's a really fun way to get into this topic. And perhaps the most fun is that when I'm at a conference and people ask me about my podcast and what I'm up to, I say, well, I've been working on an episode on Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis. So that's lots of fun. So Kutcher and Kunis are clearly concerned about raising those well-adjusted kids. They don't want their privileged life to spoil their children. But recently, Kutcher made two particular comments that I want to focus on to help us understand their perspective. I'm going to quote. First, Kutcher said, and here's the quote, "I'm not setting up a trust for them. We'll end up giving our money away to charity and to various things." And then secondly, he said, and here's the quote, "If my kids want to start a business and they have a good business plan, I'll invest in it, but they're not getting trusts. So hopefully they'll be motivated to have what they have or some version of what they had." So there are two parts to those quotes. The first is Kutcher and Kunis plan to leave all of their assets to charity at their deaths. And then secondly, well, it's not quite that simple. They plan to make funds available for their children in the way of loans to facilitate what the child is doing. And then broadly, remember their overall goal, to raise well-adjusted kids and to not leave spoiled and entitled children. So let's unpack those two comments by Kutcher. First, this illustrates what we talk about here on Once Removed, the importance of setting an overall goal, and then how important it is to have the right, thoughtful structure to carry it out, and the right people to carry it out. So here are a few notes. First of all, this strategy of theirs solves the tax issue. People are so concerned about transfer taxes, and I think rightly so. But if Kutcher and Kunis structure this properly, then there might be zero estate tax due at the death of either one of them or both of them. Imagine that $250 million fortune, which might otherwise trigger over $100 million in estate tax. All of that passing with no estate tax at all. Well, how does that work? Well, at the death of one spouse, the assets can be structured to trigger no estate tax through the marital deduction. I talk about that concept in episode 3 of this podcast. This marital deduction works in this case because both Kutcher and Kunis are married and are U.S. citizens. Although Kunis was born in the Ukraine and came to the U.S. as a young child, I understand that she's now a U.S. citizen. Of course, the first spouse to die will want to make sure that he or she structures the estate plan so that the funds qualify for this marital deduction, but also so at the second spouse's death, the funds pass to the charities that that first spouse maybe had in mind. Again, we want to make sure that first spouse builds the appropriate amount of flexibility and structure into his or her estate plan to ensure their wishes are carried out. But then at the death of the second spouse, the assets would all normally be subject to estate tax. But again, if all the assets pass to charity, then the assets would qualify for that unlimited charitable deduction from estate tax. So they've solved the estate tax problem. By the way, they've also solved the gift tax problem because they won't be making gifts during life. They'll just be making loans and investments, which are not taxable gifts. But as we'll see, this is just the beginning. I'm going to break this down into a few more parts. In another episode, we'll talk about how to leave funds to charity. There's a spectrum from a donor advised fund to outright gifts to private foundations. Again, that's the subject of another episode. So we're not going to dive into his overall goal of leaving all to charity. But first, let's test this structure a little bit. This structure is very simple, of just leaving everything to charity. But again, it's simple to a fault. Here's one question. What happens if they both pass away before the children are adults? That is, this plan might work well if they're both living when the children are growing up and making these decisions. And then eventually when the children are adults, that's when their parents pass away. But what happens if the parents die before that time? If everything goes to charity, then the children can no longer benefit from those funds. The charity would have a duty to not benefit individuals like the children. So I wonder how they'd solve this problem. Would they set up a fund to provide this kind of benefit for the children during the child's lifetime if Kutcher and Kunis die prematurely? And what would that look like? Would it just provide the basics of medical care and education and some kind of safety net, or would it provide more? Again, the terms of that, if they die prematurely, are going to be very important. And then second, note Kutcher's comment about loans. He has in mind a concept I talk about a lot, which I call a family bank. So the idea here is that individuals in the family won't get distributions from some kind of trust. They won't just get gifts. Rather, they'll have the opportunity to get loans. Now, what's interesting is that Kutcher has said he'd evaluate the particular opportunity the child has, and Kutcher wants to see a business plan. Those business plans can be really important for that family bank so that Kutcher can evaluate, well, is this really a good type of investment? And he can provide some good guidance. But then the question is, what about after Kutcher's death? Who evaluates that loan then? So that's another example of how we could structure this type of entity to make these kinds of loans. However, the actors, the process is going to be incredibly important after the death of Kutcher and Kunis. And lastly, Kutcher and Kunis are really struggling with this overall issue of the psychology of wealth. And there's just really no great answer there of how to raise well-adjusted children, especially when they're surrounded by great wealth. And actually, in Kutcher and Kunis's case, not just wealth, but fame and celebrity. So I actually wonder about Kutcher and Kunis's plan to solve this during their lifetime. They already have shared their perspective on presence and the like, but a lot of people find that it's helpful just to walk through some basic exercises on making sure the child is responsible. Things like making sure the child has chores, gets a job. Just like Kutcher had mentioned, maybe if they come to you, they have a business proposal and they can work through real consequences of a business not doing well. And even something as simple as paying with cash, which is something that my wife and I really try to show our kids, that we're paying with cash. So again, what I'm focused on here is the structure. And you can see that the first goal is that identifying what's the overall structure here. What's our overall vision? And then you can work with your advisors to come up with the best structure to carry out that goal. So here, once removed, we always like to leave with a takeaway or a thought exercise. So here it is for this episode. When I talk about Kutcher and Kunis and their plans to essentially leave all to charity, aside from maybe some funds for investments or loans for their children, how do you feel about that? You know, some clients really identify with this. They really think this could be a good opportunity to raise those well-adjusted children. Others disagree with this. They would prefer to leave the funds to their children, but maybe in the right way. And in fact, some clients would prefer to limit their children from leaving the funds to charity at the child's death. Those clients are concerned that if they give flexibility to further generations, such as through a power of appointment, then the children might actually divert assets to charity or to others. So for those clients, they want to put in place a very specific structure to even limit flexibility to prevent assets going to others that the settlor never intended. But most clients are somewhere in the middle. They want to benefit children, they might want to benefit charities, but in the right way. And no matter what, it's going to be good to evaluate these options with your advisors. So I'm Steve Murphy. And once again, this has been Legacy Planning Once Removed, my podcast on thoughtful estate planning. Thanks for listening.